Part 1. The Man They Didn't See. The cafe buzzed with quiet energy. Steam curled from ceramic cups. Soft indie music floated through ceiling speakers. Laptop keys clacked like a gentle percussion line. And outside, the city moved. Sharp. Suits and sneakers blending on the sidewalk. This was La Creme Bean, downtown Seattle's trendiest little corner. A place where regulars sipped oat milk lattes while posting grind mode selfies from the window seats. But when he walked in, the air shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough. He didn't slam the door, didn't stomp his feet. He walked in like anyone else. A simple black hoodie, dark jeans, shoes that had seen seasons, no briefcase, no designer belt, just a calm, quiet presence. The kind that most people overlook, and that's exactly what they did. The barista looked up. Eyes lingered. Brows tightened. Just a little. He noticed, but he said nothing. He stepped to the counter, placed a gentle hand on the cool white marble. "Morning," he said, voice warm. "Medium drip, black. Please." The barista blinked. Didn't speak. Didn't nod. Just earned and started grinding beans. A young woman entered behind him. Yoga pants, designer tote. "Almond matcha?" The barista smiled. She giggled. He winked. Her drink was already halfway made. He watched. Still, no reaction, no complaint. Just patience. 5 minutes passed, then 10. People came. People went. And still, no coffee. Looked up again. The barista was whispering now, to the manager. 2 glances, 1 nod, and then the walk over. The manager wore a buttoned collar and an expression built on fake nice. "Hey there," he said, all teeth. "We've had few concerns." "Concerns?" he asked, calm. "Yeah," the manager continued, shifting weight, eyes darting. "Some of the guests, they feel uncomfortable. A beat. Because of me? We try to keep a vibe here, you know? A safe, focused environment." Silence. That word, safe, hung like smoke. He glanced around. No one met his. The girl with the matcha was suddenly deep into her phone. The couple at the window stared extra hard at their pastries. The barista had vanished behind a milk frother. He looked back at the manager, still smiling, still firm. "Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave." Pause. The kind of pause that stretches wider than a room. He blinked, once, then reached slowly into his hoodie pocket, pulled out a $5 bill, folded neatly, crisp, placed it on the counter. "You know," he said softly, "I've been in a lot. Rooms where I didn't feel welcome. But this one?" He glanced up at the ceiling. "This one's different." He turned. No anger in his steps. No stomp. No storm. Just calm. He stepped through the door. A gust of autumn wind caught his jacket as he paused on the sidewalk. And then he looked up, past the cafe, past the second-floor windows, up to the corner brick, where a small black plaque sat just under the roofline. It read 1418 Elm Street, Brooks Holdings, LLC. He smiled, not out of joy, but out of clarity. Because while they saw a stranger in a hoodie, they didn't see the man who owned the building they stood in, and now they would. Long before he owned the building, he used to watch them, not from inside conference rooms, not from board meetings or penthouse views, but from the back seat of a bus. His name was Daniel Brooks, and back then, he was just a kid with big eyes and hand-me-down shoes. The city was his classroom, concrete his teacher. While other boys argued over basketball stats, Daniel stared out of windows, memorizing cornices, glass facades, and load-bearing lines. He didn't know the terms yet. He just knew they meant something. He was raised in Southside Chicago, tiny apartment, thin walls. Mama's gospel humming through the air as she fried eggs at 6 a.m. Her name was Alma, nurse, warrior, protector of hope in a neighborhood that chewed through it fast. Daniel remembered one night when the power went out, freezing cold, no heat, no light. He asked, "Why's our building so broken?" And she held his face, kissed his forehead, and said, "Because people who look like us don't get to build them. But you just might." He didn't understand then, but he felt it. That night, under 3 blankets and a flickering candle, Daniel drew his first building down on the back of his math homework. Years passed, pain shaped purpose. Bullets sang lullabies at night. Sirens became background music. But Daniel kept building, with his mind. Scholarships came, late nights, no parties, just study halls and side jobs. He cleaned lecture halls at dawn, served coffee to students, who never tipped. And at night, he studied architectural design under a broken desk lamp, Northwestern University. Civil engineering, summa cum laude, no celebration dinner, no champagne. Just a quiet walk past buildings he could finally name, and whisper to himself, "Someday, you'll be mine." He took every cent he'd earned in 11th I-42s and bought his first property, a crumbling duplex on 87th Street. It smelled like mildew and bad decisions. Everyone told him he was crazy. But he saw it differently. He saw a future. He scrubbed mold, fought off rats, learned plumbing from YouTube, painted every wall by hand. 6 months later, he sold it for twice what he paid. Then he did it again, and again, and again. At 31, Daniel Brooks owned 15 buildings. At 35, he founded Brooks Holdings LLC, a firm focused on urban renewal, but not the kind that pushed people out. He didn't believe in gentrification. He believed in reclamation, reclaiming blocks for the people who had been overlooked, creating spaces where Black kids could dream and build. And yet, with all his success, the articles, the Forbes profile, the TEDx talk, he still got followed in department stores, still got called sir like it was a warning, still watched people lock their car doors when he crossed the street. So, he stopped trying to explain himself, because Daniel knew something now. The people who most underestimate you are the ones most shocked when they realize they were standing in your shadow. So that morning, outside La Creme Bean, as the wind played with the corner of his hoodie, as the memory of being asked to leave still echoed, Daniel didn't feel rage. He felt clarity. Clarity that they hadn't kicked out a customer. They had kicked out their landlord, and in 3 weeks, their lease was up. He pulled out his phone, tapped one name. Lisa, executive assistant. "Lisa," he said, voice. Even, "I need the lease docs for 1418 Elm Street. Pause. And block my calendar. I'm paying that cafe a visit next Tuesday." Because Daniel Brooks had learned one thing over the years. Never raise your voice. Just raise the rent. It wasn't the first time. Being overlooked, dismissed, spoken about, but never to. For Daniel Brooks, it had happened so often he could count the exact moments that carved themselves into memory. And each one left a scar. Not of pain, but of fuel. He remembered the watch boutique in Manhattan. He had just closed on a $3.2 million brownstone. Still had drywall dust on his jeans. Walked into a luxury shop on Madison Ave. The sales associate didn't greet him. Didn't ask what he was looking for. Didn't offer a glass of water like the man in the tailored suit next to him. Instead, she looked at him like he'd wandered in by accident. "Sir, this collection starts at $14,000. Daniel blinked, smiled, then pulled out a black titanium. "Amex, make it 2, or the lobby meeting in Los Angeles." Daniel had flown in to pitch a partnership, a city renewal project designed to transform a forgotten district into affordable tech offices for minority startups. The receptionist told him to wait. 30 minutes passed. When he finally asked again, she said, "The janitorial interviews are tomorrow. Sorry for the confusion." He didn't correct her, just waited, until the glass elevator opened, and the CEO he was meeting stepped out. Arms wide, "Daniel Brooks, man, we're lucky to have you." The receptionist turned pale. Daniel simply nodded. It had become a pattern. The world only respected him after it saw the title, the credentials, the money. But that wasn't what defined him. What defined him was how he carried himself when no one was watching. when people assumed he was less, when they looked past him, and especially when they tried to shrink him. So when he stood in his office that afternoon reviewing the lease to La Creme Bean, none of it surprised him. The café was under Brooks Holdings LLC, lease term 5 years, clause 8.1, grounds for early termination. Include tenant behavior that violates anti-discrimination policy or reflects poorly on building ownership. Daniel smiled, not smugly, but like someone who saw the final puzzle piece slide into place. He turned to his assistant, Lisa, sharp, efficient, always 2 steps ahead. She didn't need a long explanation. "Should I prep the notice?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "We're going to walk it through first." Her brow lifted. "You're going in person?" He nodded. "I want them to see me again. This time, with context." Because for Daniel, it was never about revenge. It was about reminders. That dignity doesn't need a title. That respect isn't earned through clothes or bank accounts, but should be given freely. And when it's not, well, you don't get to learn that lesson softly. He spent the rest of the evening reviewing architectural inspection forms, printed blueprints, called his contractor for a minor walkthrough, and then he did something no one expected. He sat down, wrote a note, not to the barista, not to the manager, but to himself. "Don't respond with noise, respond with presence." He folded it, slipped it in his wallet, next to a picture of his mother, Alma, smiling in her nurse's scrubs. The next Tuesday, he wasn't walking into a cafe. He was walking into a classroom, and someone was about to learn. Tuesday. It came fast. The sky was moody, bruised with gray. Light drizzle tapped gently on windshields, washing the sidewalks clean. Seattle's version of a reset, and Daniel Brooks was dressed for clarity. Charcoal gray suit, single-breasted, tailored, sharp, crisp white shirt. No tie because he didn't need one. He stood in front of the mirror that morning, buttoning his cuffs slowly, 1 breath in, 2 seconds out. His mother's voice echoed in memory. "Don't walk in loud. Walk in undeniable." He arrived exactly at 9:03 a.m., not too early, not too late, right on time, for impact. Behind him were 2 team members, Jules, his lead architect, Cam, his building compliance officer. They carried blueprints, inspection, checklists, and clipboards. Daniel? He carried nothing except presence. The door to La Creme Bean swung open with a soft jingle. Tristan, the barista, was at the register. He glanced up, eyes landing first on the suits, then on Daniel. He blinked. Recognition flickered, then confusion. He whispered to someone near the espresso machine. Within seconds, the same manager from last week appeared, still wearing that performative smile. But this time, it cracked just a little faster. "Good morning," the manager said, trying to stay composed. Can I help you?" Daniel returned the smile, smaller, controlled. "Yes," he said calmly. "We're here to conduct a routine property inspection." The eye manager froze, then tried to laugh it off. "Inspection? I think there's been a mistake. We rent this space from Brooks Holdings LLC," Daniel interrupted. "And I'm Brooks." The words landed like thunder, without needing to raise his voice. Silence swept the cafe. Someone at the corner table looked up. A woman paused. Mid-sip, the barista dropped a spoon. Daniel didn't flinch. He turned to Jules and Cam. "Let's start with the main floor layout. HVAC, fire exits, plumbing certs." Jules nodded and unrolled the blueprints right there on a nearby table. Cam pulled out his compliance checklist and began taking notes. The manager stood frozen, mouth open, mind spinning. You own this building?" Daniel looked him dead in the eyes. "I do." A pause, then calm as breath. "I believe you asked me to leave last week. Something about making people uncomfortable?" The manager stuttered. I didn't know. I thought—" Daniel raised a hand gently. "I know what you thought." He stepped closer. Not threatening, just present. "Here's what happens next," he said. You'll continue operating as usual, for now. My team will finish their assessment, but I'll be delivering a decision on your lease renewal by end of week. The manager's face drained. We've never had complaints before. This must be a misunderstanding. Daniel cut in, tone still even. He leaned just slightly forward. Let me be very clear. What you misunderstood is who gets to decide whether someone belongs. He turned to walk toward the front door, but paused, looked back once more. Oh, and if any of your staff would like to discuss bias training, my assistant Lisa has pamphlets. She'll drop them off this afternoon. The bell jingled as he exited. The drizzle had stopped, the sky just a bit brighter, and behind the glass door, the barista and manager stood like two ghosts caught in daylight. Outside, Cam handed him the checklist. Everything looks up to code, he said. Daniel nodded. Good. He folded the paper, placed it inside his inner jacket pocket. Now we build something better. Because power isn't about screaming. It's not about revenge. It's about showing up and letting the silence speak for you. The next morning, the envelope arrived, not via email, not through some automated system, but in person, hand-delivered cream-colored paper, thick, smooth, heavy in the hand. The receptionist at La Creme Bean didn't even know where to put. She just placed it on the counter like it might explode. The manager saw the letter, saw the logo, Brooks Holdings LLC, and felt the chill crawl up his spine. He opened it slowly, each word struck like a drumbeat. This letter serves as formal notification. Lease will not be renewed. Effective immediately following the final date of term. Citing Clause 8.1, violation of conduct standards and discriminatory behavior. Toward patrons. There was no drama, no police, no press, just paper and power. Inside Daniel's office, sunlight spilling across his desk, he reviewed the response. An apologetic email, 2 missed calls, a frantic voicemail from someone. At the cafe's franchise office, he didn't reply, because this wasn't about a public takedown. This was about something deeper, about boundaries and consequences. He thought of all the times people like him had been silenced, dismissed, made to feel like guests in spaces they helped build. This wasn't just about a coffee shop anymore. It was about reminding everyone that you don't get to rent a space and forget who owns it. His assistant Lisa stepped in. They sent a letter. Want to apologize in person. Offer to partner on diversity programs. Maybe even extend the lease if you're willing to. Daniel held up a hand. Didn't need to hear more. He already knew his answer. 2 days later, a notice of vacancy appeared in the cafe window. Typed, clean, undeniable. The customers were confused. The staff looked hollow. Tristan, the barista, stood silently behind the counter. As one woman asked, "Wait, they're closing." No one answered. Not yet. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat with Jules and Cam at a quiet co-working space, blueprints on the table, coffee in hand, and something new on the horizon. Daniel tapped his finger against the top sheet, a new layout design. "We're not just replacing them," he said. "We're reimagining the space. And the name? Brooks and Brew. A cafe with a different mission, where everyone felt welcome, where community wasn't a marketing tactic. It was the foundation. Baristas from overlooked neighborhoods, scholarship, tip jars, a mentorship wall for young Black entrepreneurs. He wasn't building a coffee shop. He was building a statement. Back at La Creme Bean, the manager packed the last box. The espresso machines were unplugged. The shelves bare, silence, cold and unforgiving. He looked around one last time, then up at the corner of the ceiling. There it was again, that black plaque. 18th Elm Street, Brooks Holdings LLC, and finally, he understood. They hadn't just lost a lease. They'd lost their chance to do better. Back in Daniel's office, Lisa handed him the final signed termination papers. He signed without a pause, then stood by the window. The rain had returned, soft, rhythmic, like applause against the glass. And Daniel, he didn't feel anger or triumph. He felt alignment. Because justice, sometimes it doesn't roar. Sometimes it just walks in quietly, wears a suit and hands you a letter. It took exactly 19 days. 19 days from the time La Creme Bean closed its doors to the moment the neighborhood stood still, staring at something new. Gone were the pastel awnings. Gone was the cursive logo. Gone was the pretense. In its place, a matte black sign, bold white letters. No frills. Brooks and Brew, simple, direct, unapologetically clear. And beneath it a second line, smaller but louder in meaning. Coffee, community, change. The grand opening wasn't flashy. No red carpet, no influencer giveaways, no press cameras, waiting out front, just real people, waiting in line. In the rain, some wore hoodies, some wore suits, some carried babies on their hips, but all of them were seen. Inside, the space had changed. The cold white marble was replaced with warm wood grain. Counters, local art filled the walls. Jazz floated through vintage speakers. Real jazz, not playlisted background noise. At the corner stood a chalkboard, hand-lettered with care. Barista of the Week, Kareem. Future Civil Engineer Community. Tip jar, Youth Coding Scholarship. Ask us about our Pay It Forward board. Daniel stood behind the counter that morning, not to serve, but to witness. He watched a woman in scrubs hand her extra change to the scholarship jar. A high school boy nervously place his first job application on the counter. Two elderly neighbors laugh over chess in the corner. And for the first time, in a long time, Daniel felt peace. Then, the door chimed. He turned and saw a face he didn't expect. Tristan, the barista. No name tag, no latte in hand, just him, in street clothes, carrying nothing but guilt. He didn't step in right away, just stood under the new sign, looking up, looking, changed. Daniel met his gaze, didn't flinch, didn't smile, just nodded. Tristan took a breath, stepped inside, walked straight to him. I just wanted to say, he started. I know, Daniel replied, calm, even. But what matters is what you do next. He gestured to the bulletin board near the register. A flyer for community service, job training workshops, open interviews. Start there, Daniel said. Tristan nodded, eyes misting. Not because he'd been shamed, but because he'd been given a door he didn't deserve, and that meant everything. As the day went on, the cafe buzzed with something. Different, not just caffeine, but connection. A young black girl walked up to the counter, clutching a notebook. I want to be an architect, she whispered shyly. Daniel leaned down, smiled. You picked the right place. By 3 p.m., the tip jar overflowed. By 5 p.m., the mentorship board had 6 signups. And by 7 p.m., the last customer left with a thank you that sounded more like gratitude than habit. Daniel locked the door, turned the sign to closed. He stood at the center of the room, alone now. Lights dimmed, Jazz still humming, and whispered, "This is what belonging looks like, not velvet ropes, not invitation-only events, not proving your worth to buy a cup of coffee, just space, open, honest, human." Brooks and Brew wasn't a business. It was a response to every time someone had been told, "You don't belong here," and it answered firmly, "Yes, you do." The ballroom shimmered, crystal chandeliers floated like frozen fire. Soft golds glowed off mirrored pillars. A string quartet played slow, deliberate notes, something between elegance and awe. This was the Seattle Civic Leadership Gala. A once-a-year gathering of business leaders, philanthropists, and power brokers. But this year, there was a different kind of buzz in the air, because everyone had heard the story. The cafe, the sign, the man who didn't shout, but still made the ground shake. Daniel Brooks stood near the back of the room. Classic black tux, no cufflinks, no flash, just a quiet kind of presence. that somehow outshined everyone else. He hadn't come to speak, hadn't come to be seen. He came because Lisa, his ever-persistent assistant, told him bluntly, "You've spent your life building rooms for other people. Just this once. Let people invite you into theirs." He stood near the edge of the crowd, sipping ginger ale, scanning the room like it was a building blueprint. Elegant, complex, fragile in the wrong hands. Someone brushed his shoulder gently. "Daniel." "Brooks." He turned, a young woman, maybe mid-20s, holding a notepad, starry-eyed. "I just wanted to say, thank you. Brooks and Brew is where I wrote my first pitch deck." He smiled, nodded. "Then I'll take a free coffee if it goes public." She laughed, a little too loud, then disappeared into the glittering crowd. As the evening wore on, speeches echoed across clinking glasses, founders, CEOs, donors, until the host walked on stage, tuxedo crisp, voice polished. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, tapping the mic, "tonight we honor not just growth but grace." We've all read the headlines, seen the tweets, watched the viral videos, but behind those headlines was a man who didn't take the mic until tonight. Daniel blinked. "Wait, what? Please welcome our final honoree of the evening, Mr. Daniel Brooks." Applause exploded. Spotlights shifted. Daniel froze. He wasn't ready. Didn't ask for this, didn't want the weight of words. But Lisa, from across the room, gave a small nod. That don't shrink kind of nod. So, he walked, slow steps, steady. Not toward fame, toward truth. He reached the mic, adjusted it quietly, took a breath, then looked out, not at their tuxedos or gowns, but into their eyes, and spoke. "I don't do speeches. I build walls. I check foundation lines. I fix what others say is too broken to save. And for most of my life, I've walked into rooms that weren't built for me. Sometimes they whispered. Sometimes they stared. Sometimes they asked me to leave." He paused. A hush blanketed the room. "But here's what I've learned. The most dangerous thing you can do is believe them. Because once you do, you start shrinking. You lower your voice, you round your edges, you apologize for taking up space you already earned. And I'm done doing that." Gasps. Rippled quietly. Eyes shimmered. "This isn't about coffee. It's about who gets to belong. About how many people walk into rooms already bracing to be questioned. And how powerful it is when someone finally says, 'You don't have to prove yourself today.'" He looked toward the side of the stage. There stood a group of his baristas, young, bright-eyed, proud. "Brooks and Brew isn't my legacy," he said. "They are. Because justice isn't loud, it's consistent. It's quiet doors being opened. It's receipts in your own name. It's a kid walking into a space and seeing someone who looks like them. Running it. Silence. Not awkward. Sacred. Then, like a tide, the room rose. Applause thundered. People stood, phones lifted, tears blinked away. And Daniel? He didn't smile wide. He didn't bow. He just stepped off the stage and walked toward his team, toward the people he came to lift. One of his baristas, Kareem, the one who once said he wasn't leadership material, leaned in. "You changed the room." Daniel looked at him. "No," he said quietly. "We just reclaimed it." It was a Wednesday, rain again because, well, Seattle, the kind that didn't scream, just whispered on windows, like it had something to say. Brooks and Brew opened like any other morning. The espresso machine hissed to life. The smell of cinnamon scones drifted into the street. Jazz played softly. Coltrane if you listened closely. And at 9:42 a.m., he walked in. Small, quiet, thin hoodie soaked at the edges, shoes too big, too worn. A boy, maybe 11, black, wide eyes cracked, lips, clutching a spiral notebook like it held something too precious to lose. He didn't step up to the counter, just stood, near the door, 1 foot inside, 1 foot out, looking around like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. No one said anything. No one stared, because Brooks and Brew was built for this. Daniel noticed him from the office door. Didn't rush, didn't send a staff member. He walked over slowly. Like the boy was a blueprint he was still learning how to read. "Hey," Daniel said gently, "you here for the cocoa or the jazz?" The boy blinked, didn't answer. Daniel smiled. "Well, good news. We got both." He crouched a little, brought his voice just low enough, not to overpower, but to invite. "You want to sit down, The?" Boy hesitated, then nodded. Daniel led him to the corner booth, the one near the window, warm seat, good light. View of the whole room, the safest spot in any café. Minutes later, a barista brought over hot cocoa, steam curled like a ribbon, one perfect marshmallow on top. The boy stared at it, like it might disappear if he touched it. Daniel nudged the cup gently toward him. Still no words. So Daniel tried something else. "Ever built anything?" he asked. The boy looked up, shook his head. "Lego? Paper towers? Cardboard castles?" A pause, then softly, "Paper bridges, for science class." Daniel's eyes lit up. "No kidding? How long did it hold?" The boy shrugged. "Like 7 textbooks." Daniel leaned back, impressed. "Man, that's more than I can bench press." A smile, small, fleeting. But there. He didn't ask why the boy was there. Didn't press about the hoodie or the wet socks or the empty backpack. Because sometimes, what someone needs most is space that doesn't ask for an explanation. Eventually, the boy reached into his notebook, showed Daniel a sketch, pencil lines. Crooked but clear. A tiny cafe, 2 tables, a big window. Daniel stared, didn't say, "Great job" or "You're talented." Instead, he asked, "Can I show this to my architect?" The boy blinked. "You mean like, for real?" Daniel nodded. Blueprints. Start with brave pencils. They talked for 30 more minutes, about buildings, about ideas, about a kid who didn't have much mahar, but had vision. Then the boy stood up, took the last sip of cocoa, wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his hoodie. Daniel handed him a card, not a business card, a Brooks and Brew pass, laminated, scuffed at the edges. "Show this anytime, cocoa's on us, and when you're ready to build your next bridge, we'll be here." The boy didn't say much, just nodded, but that nod, it carried weight, because, for the first time in a long time, someone saw him as more than a shadow. The bell above the door rang as he left, and Daniel, he just stood by the booth, looking at the cocoa cup, and the notebook the boy forgot. He flipped it open, page after page of tiny floor plans, elevators, windows, dreams drawn in pencil. He smiled. "Blueprints start with brave pencils," he whispered again, and tucked the notebook under his arm. It was late afternoon. The golden hour had just begun, that soft, forgiving light that made even tired cities look tender. Brooks and Brew was winding down. Dishes clinked gently in the back. Jazz was low, like a heartbeat. And Daniel stood by the bar, rolling up his sleeves. There was something deeply satisfying about the slow hours, when the world quieted and the walls felt like home. He reached for a cloth to wipe the counter, and then the door opened. At first, he didn't see her face. She wore a wool hat, long coat, carried 2 tote bags, and the kind of posture that said she hadn't rested in a while. But when she looked up, his chest pulled tight. Her, the nurse. Miss Angela. It had been over 20 years. Back then, she was the night shift nurse at Mercy, General, and he was a 16-year-old kid with a busted wrist and no insurance. He'd slipped on ice trying to deliver groceries for cash. Showed up bruised, quiet, scared. The ER receptionist barely looked at him, called for security. But Angela, had looked straight into his eyes and said, "Sit, I got you." She hadn't just fixed his wrist. She gave him her own scarf to keep warm, snuck him an apple from the staff fridge, and before he left, slipped a note into his coat pocket. He'd memorized every word. "They don't see your worth yet. Doesn't mean it's not there. Keep building. Now, 2 decades later, she had stepped into his space, and still, she didn't recognize him. She looked around the cafe slowly, eyes filled with quiet wonder. "This place is beautiful," she murmured. Daniel smiled. "It's better now that you're in it." She turned, froze, studied his face like a long-forgotten song. Then, "Daniel." Soft, unsure, emotional. He nodded. "I remember you," she whispered. He stepped forward, held out his hand. "I remember you too." She took it, her grip still strong, still steady. They sat by the window, 2 cups of tea. No need for small talk, just warmth, gratitude, recognition. Angela looked around again. "All this, you built?" Daniel nodded. She shook her head, blinking back tears. "I always knew you'd be something." "No," he said gently. "You saw something in me before I ever did." He reached into his wallet, pulled out an envelope, inside a folded check. Nothing flashy, no speech. He slid it across the table. Angela looked confused. "What's this?" He met her eyes. "A thank you for that night, for seeing me, for the apple, for the note." She opened the envelope. Eyes widened. "No, Daniel, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," he said softly. "Because you didn't just fix my wrist. You reminded me I was worth saving." She reached for his hand again, held it this time, not like a nurse, but like family, and said, "I didn't do anything special. I just cared when no one else did." Daniel smiled. "That's the most special thing of all." As the sun slipped lower, painting amber light across the cafe walls, the two of them sat in that booth, one who had given a beginning and one who had returned to finish the circle. Because sometimes, justice isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about proving someone right. Morning light kissed the brick of 1418 Elm Street, soft, golden, gentle. The kind of light that didn't ask for attention, but earned it. Inside Brooks and Brew, the day had just begun. Baristas tied aprons. Ovens hummed. The smell of nutmeg and espresso lifted through the air like a quiet anthem. Daniel Brooks stood by the register, hands in pockets, heart calm. He wasn't checking numbers. He wasn't thinking strategy. He was watching, just watching. Because what he saw was everything he'd ever dreamed of. At table 3, a group of college students mapped out business plans on napkins. At the community board, a woman posted a flyer for a single mom's coding course. By the window, Angela, yes, Miss Angela, laughed over tea with 2 young nurses on break from the hospital across the street. And at the corner booth, he was back, the kid, the same boy from the rainy day, now dry, confident, sketching, a new notebook, straighter lines, bolder vision. Daniel walked over slowly. "Back at it?" he asked, smiling. The boy nodded. "I made a blueprint for a real café, like this one." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Real café, huh? I thought this was the real one." The boy grinned, shy but proud. "You know what I mean." Daniel laughed, then sat. They spent the next 20 minutes flipping through pages. The boy spoke with more confidence now, pointing at wall placement, natural lighting angles, foot traffic. Daniel didn't say much, just listened. Like someone who knew what a dream sounded like before the world tried to mute it. When they reached the final page, the boy looked up. "Do you think it's good enough?" Daniel leaned back, looked him in the eye, and said, "You didn't draw a cafe. You drew a space where people belong. That's not just good enough. That's legacy." Later that evening, after the last mug was washed and lights dimmed low, Daniel sat alone at table 4, notebook open. One sentence written across the top of the page. It was never about coffee, because it wasn't. It was about something deeper. About a man who once stood outside a cafe being told to leave, and who chose not to fight back with fire, but to build a new door and hold it open. He looked up at the plaque above the front door, same one. Still reads, 14 to 18. Elm Street, Brooks Holdings, LLC, but now. Everyone in the neighborhood knows what that means. Not just ownership, but invitation. And maybe, just maybe, someday years from now, someone else will walk through that same door, someone small, quiet, doubtful. And the person behind the counter will smile and say, "You're right where you're supposed to be." Because that's the thing about legacy. It doesn't shout. It doesn't flash. It just keeps the door open long enough for the next story to begin. The end.